Hello everyone, welcome to Zalingam Media. This video is about the Kuki's arms group, Kuki Chin National Front, KNF, and its armed wing Kuki Chin National Army, KNA, have emerged. The organization claim that the organization considers Borm, Lusai, Panko, Kayan, Khmer and Mro ethnic groups of the Chittagong Hill Tracts, CHT, as Zo people and has emerged as a political organization with the aim of asserting the rights of the Zo people. Although the leaders of the organization claim that the KNA was formed to assert the rights of the Zo people in the CHT. According to local sources, the Kuki Chin Development Organization, KNDO, was formed in 2008 in Rimoa Pasla of Bandarban district by declaring Nathan Borm as president and Vantlanian Borm as general secretary. According to their organization's statement, the name of the organization was later changed to the Kuki China National Front, KNF, in 2016 due to the failing of asserting its rights through democratic way, and they embarked on an armed movement forming the Kuki Chin National Army, KNA, as the armed wing of the KNF. According to KNF leaders, the goal of the KNF is to establish the CHT as a region of Zo ethnic people, and Christian faith people. The Mizoram-based newspaper Vantlani reported in Mizo language on the 23rd of March 2022 that KNDO had demanded to the government of Bangladesh in 2015 to take steps for development of the living standards of Zo people in the CHT and allocate a separate budget for the Zo people. The organization also demanded that the government recognize Zo people inhabited 9 Upper-Zilas sub-districts of the 3 hill districts as Kuki Chin states. As soon as it emerged, the organization launched a campaign against the CHT Accord and PCJSS and against the Chakma community. On December 30, 2021, the status of the Kuki Chin National Front on its own Facebook account reads, "The Chittagong Hill Tracts is not a Jama land, it is a Kuki Chin territory." The said areas and were claimed by KNA were a part of Kuki Independence Hills country. The Kukis in India and Myanmar are very happy to see their brothers in Bangladesh fight for their own rights and for the lost land. The Kuki tribe is spread across states of the northeast, parts of Myanmar and the Chittagong Hill Tracts in Bangladesh. But the map of the Kuki homeland has crystallized mainly around Manipur and now in Bangladesh. For the Kukis, World War I was crucial because of their refusal to join the Labour Corps. The British had demanded recruits to the Corps and the Manipur King promised 2,000 men. However, Kuki chiefs refused to join and instead declared war on the colonizers in 1917. The conflict that followed lasted for 2 years and claimed many lives. It has been variously called the Great Kuki Rebellion, the Kuki Rising, the Anglo-Kuki War depending on who is writing its history and when. While the 1917 to 1919 Anglo-Kuki War was one of the biggest uprisings by the tribe against the British, Kuki resistance first emerged in the 18th century, according to Hau Kip, when fighters from the Hill tribe attacked British subjects in the Chittagong Hill Tracts. It intensified after their Treaty of Yandabo, signed in 1826 and bringing to an end the First Anglo-Burmese War. Under the treaty, the Burmese signed away large tracts of what is now India's northeast, including Assam, Manipur and the hill areas, to the British. There were periodic Kuki reigns on British subjects after that, in 1845, 1847-48, 1849, 1850 and 1851. In the Great Kuki invasion of Tipperah in the 1860s, 15 villages were burnt and around 185 British subjects killed. The decades after Indian independence would see the Kuki movement become increasingly complex and splintered, not least because of the tensions within the Pan-Kuki identity. But what of that brief movement between 1917 and 1919? Colonial writers filed it away as a rebellion against enlisting in the Labour Corps, wrote Hau Kip, but, Native scholars termed it a war of independence. At one of the meetings in which the Kuki chiefs prepared for war, said Hau Kip, they declared this: "At all cost, we should fight against the British for the preservation of our independence, for the protection of our land, culture and tradition." At a speech made on the anniversary of the conflict last year, historian Laldana mentions links between the Kuki fighters and Bengali revolutionary nationalists. The partition of Bengal in 1905 had spurred the Swadeshi movement, and nationalist organizations sent their emissaries to the Kuki chiefs of the southern clans, encouraging them to resist the high-handed methods of British colonial rulers. Therefore, Kuki People's Liberation Movement in this part of the country in 1917 can be seen as an extension of the nationalist freedom struggle of the country, concludes Dana. Whether the two movements dovetailed so smoothly may be a matter of debate. But the Anglo-Kuki War throws up an unfamiliar picture of the freedom movement. Instead of one great tide of nationalism, it seems to become a bricklage of varied struggles, some of them unfulfilled. Yet each makes its claim on history, as if to say, this too. EPOW. Homepage Chikam Officials Directory Radio Yelout Calendar Yellow Pages Rangwaba Video Ming Books Yek News Reviews Manipura Travel Education Features Galleries Leisure Links Mac Panorama Tools Contribute Email Day, Wednesday, April 20, 2022 Search on epow.net Submit Facebook fan page Google Plus fan page Follow us on Twitter RSS feed You are here, Home Manipur History of Manipur The Great Kuki Rebellion of 1917-19, Its Real Significances by Don Morgan Kipjan, courtesy, The Sangkai Express. The Great Kuki Rebellion of 1917-1919 was a defining event not only for the Kukis but for all Manipuris as well. It was the finest hours of the Kuki nation, because of the very fact that the military juggernaut of the mighty British Empire was kept at bay for full 2 years by bands of Kuki warriors. The British troops were ambushed, harassed, picked off, booby-trapped, and tormented at will by the tenacious Kukis in the hill areas like Apache or Sioux Indians. The image of the British Raj and her much-vaunted army was shattered. For all the Manipuris, the debacle at Kongjam was more than avenged. The British then realized that they could be defeated as well. The realm was up in arms, for they then realized that they lurked a tribe of sturdy, resilient and martial race called the Kukis in the foothills of Lower Himalayas. The British threw in all their resources for a quick subjugation of an ill-equipped hillsman, but it took a full 2 years with the greatest of difficulties logistically imaginable to finally bring an end to a rebellion of a great significance, unheard of since the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857. The British claimed a military victory, which actually should be more of political and administrative victory with a brute military showmanship. Even if it was recorded by the British military historians as a full military victory, remember, history is written by the victors, it certainly was a Pyrrhic victory. In short, the Britishers' gains, with their heavy losses, did not justify the means for the crown. The heavy price paid by the crown was best recorded in the history of Assam Rifles by the then Degar, W.J. Shakespeare, not the one from Avon, nor related, who himself was directly involved in the overall military operations. Thus, the Kuki Rebellion, therefore grew into the largest series of military operations conducted on this side of India since the old, full-scale, expeditionary days. Generals Penn Simmons and Trigger in the late 1880s, or the futile Boer expedition of the 1911-12. Eclipsing them all in casualties and arduousness of active service. Nothing could be truer than this description. However, what Shakespeare failed to mention was the very fact that the Great Kuki Rebellion of 1917-19 was the longest, largest, costliest military operation in the whole of India since the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857. It was also an absolute logistical nightmares for field commanders and inexperienced officers. that was exactly why 2,000 fully armed soldiers, later on reinforced by over 5,000 soldiers including Burma military armed police, took 2 full years, which was an eternity for the mighty Britishers, vis-à-vis the size and status of the enemy, to subdue about 2,000 Kuki militiamen with just about 1,500 one-shot muskets and a 100 or so mountain guns, but without adequate gunpowder and extra parts. The sights of tenacious Kuki warriors picking out targets and stealth ambushes and resorting to scorched earth tactics would have been a demoralizing reminiscence of the Napoleon's Grand Army harassed and tormented by the Russians to the field observers in the first part of the rebellion. It was first armed jungle guerrilla warfare faced and experienced by the British Army in British India, a modern-day equivalent of the Shivaji's Marathas and the Spanish rebels, which the great all-conquering Napoleon dubbed his Spanish ulcer. The Kuki warriors were undoubtedly the Crown's ulcers, which remained unremedied for 2 years during the height of her glorious days. The skirmishes were sharp and bloody. For young British officers, even field commanders, it was baptism by fire, a real live battle inoculation and an agonizingly unforgettable experience, which put them in good stead 20 years hence. The hard-earned lessons learned by those young officers and infantrymen barely out of their teens who eventually experienced the perils and miseries not taught, nor even acknowledged at the Sandhurst, nor instructed even at the West Point for that matter, were nearly forgotten over the decades of peace. The ingenious and most enterprising military tactics and finer points of guerrilla warfare learned from the resilient Kuki warriors over 2 years period and successfully improvised by the British field officers and operational commanders was finally put to maximum use after the Burma retreat, 1942, where they, and the Americans too, were routed and overran by the Japanese Imperial Army in Southeast Asia in just 2 months period. The junior young officers and all ranks who suffered tactical setbacks at the hands of the Kuki militiamen during the height of the Great Kuki Rebellion and who also learned their art of maximizing the most minimum resources perfected so successfully by the Kuki Provisional Army in so many stunning occasions were the senior field officer and operational commanders in mainland Europe and North Africa. Desperate situation calls for desperate measures. Veterans of the Kuki Rebellion of 1917-19 were summoned by Lord Archibald Wavell along with the legendary Brig. Wingate, later on Major General Lord Wingate of Burma fame, to train British, Chinese, and American officers, Kukin Rangers, in the jungles of Assam and Manipur Hills, especially the war operational areas of the Kuki Rebellion, to confront the much lesser forces of the jungle warfare experts Japanese Imperial Army on their own ground and in their own chosen conditions. The Chinese and the American Kukin Rangers successfully tormented and demoralized the much larger Japanese ground forces in small numbers of not more than 30-35 specially trained real commandos. Like the small band, 15-20, Kuki warriors who were excellent shots, the Chinese and the American Rangers knew that the less the number, the lesser the targets, from enemies, the swifter the tactical retreats, the more the operations and, the more the division of resources. The Kukis had always attacked in small numbers with stunning outputs, spreading their warriors to greater logistical field of operations, thereby totally confusing the War Office at home as to the real number of the Kuki militiamen, and therein successfully stretching the limited resources and manpower. The Kukis rebels would snared unwary British columns into a narrow pass or battlefield in the hilly areas and cut loose the netted big stones and boulders along the slope, thereby surprising them with deadly enterprising tactics, and then also cutting off the only small route for a retreat and reinforcements from the British Command HQTRS. After pinning down the army column with death and injuries all around, the Kuki rebels peppered them with remarkably well-directed volleys of incessant gunshots. On other occasions, the unwary British columns were most often than not welcomed with homemade cannons, mountain guns, with full of shrapnel. Therefore, A kuki musket section would pick them off methodically from vantage positions with maximum returns. These kuki warriors were arguably the first regular snipers in the history of Manipur. The factual historical unrecorded facts pertaining to the early successes of the kukis were due to the very fact that unlike the British troops, the kuki marksmen never wasted even an ounce of gunpowder and bullets. One of the two most remarkable military tactics was that the kuki rebels would always pick off, target the British and Indian officers, and they preferred to cause serious injuries to the enemies so as to demoralize leaderless troops who invariably would remain confused and undecided, and then to seriously wound the infantrymen with another two less ready combat soldiers, for an injured needed to be tended and carried around. A dead soldier can be left behind buried, but an injured cannot be abandoned. Moreover, the more the wounded or injured, the slower the pace of their movement. The idea was that if you killed 20 soldiers out of 50, the rest 30 would come running down one's neck, but to injured even 10 soldiers would mean only 10 men could run after the ambushes. Another deviously successful tactic, which was put to good use by the American cooking rangers during WW2, was to put sharpened stakes planted under cover on either side of the road or jungle route. So when the kuki rebels sent volleys of shots at the British troops, the soldier would automatically dive on either side of the road, nulla, with indescribable effects. Because of this, the kukis were the only nation which was defeated outrightly in open battlefield militarily by the Great British Empire. All the kuki leaders, commanders were treacherously invited to capitulate, with a promised general amnesty, with a dire threat that all kuki men, women and children and their settlements would be destroyed mercilessly. However, they were all tried as war criminals and ruthlessly sentenced to long years of rigorous imprisonment. Disclaimer: all this information are taken up from various sources in the web. We don't own the data in this video. The right is given to Scroll.in and other writers.